Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for today's webinar, Lessons in Placekeeping from Buffalo and Beyond. This webinar is part of the League's Future of Preservation webinar series, and I want to thank our sponsors, the Peggy Ann and Roger G. Gary Charitable Trust. If you found your way to this webinar but are not familiar with the Preservation League, we empower all New Yorkers to use historic preservation to enrich their communities, protect their heritage, and build a sustainable future. We do this in lots of different ways all over the state. We provide grants that jumpstart preservation projects. We advocate for preservation at the local, state, and national level. We provide technical assistance, collaborate with colleagues across the state. We award excellence in historic preservation, and nominations are currently open for our annual Excellence Awards right now. You can go to our website to find that info. We draw attention to at-risk historic sites through our 7 to Save program, and we offer lots of virtual programs like the one that you are tuning in for today. And so today's webinar, we're going to hear from sociologist and photographer David Schalliol and Assembly House 150 founder Dennis Maher about their respective work and how that work has intersected. Their paths have been crossing since 2011, and David has been documenting Dennis and his work at Assembly House since about 2014. After their presentations, they'll be joined in conversation by Dr. Jennifer Minner. She is Director of Graduate Studies, Associate Professor, and Director of the Just Places Lab at Cornell University. So a little bit about our presenters today. David Schalliol is an associate professor of sociology at St. Olaf College who is interested in the relationship between community, social structure, and place. He has exhibited his work widely, and his work has also been featured in many publications, including the New York Times and the Journal of Urban History. David is the author of Isolated Building Studies and co-author with Michael Carrier of The City Creative, The Rise of Urban Placemaking in Contemporary America. That book features Assembly House 150 as an example of hyperlocal placemaking. You can see the cover right there, and that is Assembly House 150 and Dennis right on the cover. And I can drop the link in the chat for that book as well if you are interested. Dennis Maher is an artist, designer, and educator based in Buffalo. He's the founder and director of Assembly House 150 and a professor in the Department of Architecture at the University of Buffalo. For over 20 years, he's been realizing projects at the intersection of art, design, architecture, and community engagement. He works with buildings, pieces of buildings, and people who construct buildings in order to create spaces for the collective imagination. He founded Assembly House 150 in 2014 as an outgrowth of his Fargo House project on Buffalo's West Side. Assembly House is transforming a formerly abandoned 1850s era church into an immersive architectural dream world built with tradespeople, designers, apprentices, students, and others. Themes of his work include the natures of house and home, the animism of objects, the revelation of the surreal within the familiar, and the latent memories of Western and post-industrial cultures. He has an architecture degree from Cornell, and he has exhibited widely as well at the Buffalo AKG Museum, Mattress Factory, and other places. Jennifer Minner is going to be our moderator for today's conversation. So following David and Dennis's presentation, she'll join them for a dialogue, including audience Q&A. So Jennifer Minner, PhD, is the Director of Graduate Studies and Associate Professor in the Department of City and Regional Planning at Cornell. She directs the Just Places Lab, a platform for research and creative action centered on community memory, imagination, and the just care of places. Her research and teaching focus on equitable land use planning and climate action through the reuse and adaptation of buildings and landscapes, which I thought made her kind of a perfect fit for today's conversation with David and Dennis. She serves on the Expert Advisory Committee to the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. She's one of the founders of the Circularity, Reuse, and Zero Waste Development Crowd Network, and is the faculty mentor to the Cornell Undergrad Research to Action Youth Student Organization. Her research investigates urban change, city planning, and preservation in a variety of contexts and media, from research on building a circular economy in New York State to the spatial footprints and social legacies of world expos to the use of future land use scenarios and spatial analytics to the reflections of the city and art. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jenny, and she's going to kind of intro today's conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie, for the generous introduction. It's my pleasure to join the Preservation League of New York State series on the future of preservation. And the topic, as you know, today is Lessons in Placekeeping from Buffalo and Beyond. Again, my name is Jenny Minner. I'm the Director of Graduate Studies at Cornell. So if you're interested in advanced degrees in city and regional planning or historic preservation, please reach out. And I'm delighted to be here to moderate this discussion on place making and placekeeping. I've gotten to know David's work through reading his book, The City Creative: The Rise of Urban Placemaking in Contemporary America, which he co-authored with Michael Carrier, and also his filmmaking and really compelling image making that is available. You can witness it on Instagram, among other places. His treatment of creative placemaking in this book that he'll be discussing is authoritative. He draws upon an in-depth history so that his book is grounds readers in essential sort of figures and institutions of creative placemaking, from William White and Jane Jacobs to the National Endowment of the Arts. But then his book challenges simplistic notions of creative placemaking, elevating important examples, particularly from cities such as Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit, Buffalo, among others, that are really rooted in community. Did you know that creative placemaking, for example, can consist of urban agriculture, such as the work of Growing Power in Milwaukee and the Sweetwater Foundation, or repurposing vacant buildings and adapting them to train people in the trades, such as at Assembly House 150 and through Dennis Maher's efforts in Buffalo? Creative placemaking can help communities dream about future uses of buildings, like in the artistic practices of Candy Chang, or in challenging redlining and the exploitation of African-American residents in the artwork of Amanda Williams. I'm so excited for you to hear directly from David about the nuances and complexities of creative placemaking and its connections to preservation. And his book is definitely one that I'll be using in my classes in the future. I've also had the pleasure of collaborating with Dennis Maher over the past few years. In 2017, I met Dennis in putting together the class, the Equity Preservation Workshop in Buffalo, which explored preservation and building reuse. I had read about Fargo House in the New York Times about 10 years ago, and upon request, he had opened up Fargo House to my students, and we began to learn about how he had saved the building from demolition, and we were able to observe his efforts to transform a historically significant church into an incredible powerhouse of creativity and inspiration, melding art, architecture, and the trades through the program Society for the Advancement of Construction-Related Arts, or SACRA. He advised and participated in a series of my classes on art, community preservation, and just places. And I engaged students in the first year of my lab in 2020 to help consider youth engagement in the arts and built environment as Dennis was putting together model city builders. I believe that both today will speak volumes about care for places and communities and creative methods of seeing and caring for the built environment through socially engaged creative practice. So let's give David and Dennis a virtual round of applause, and we'll begin with a presentation from David.
So, it's great to be here. Thanks so much, of course, to the Preservation League and also to Jenny and Dennis. Really excited to participate in this conversation. And so today, what I'm going to do is walk you through a variety of projects that I think are going to be helpful for us in thinking about demolition preservation and of course, some of the context of this book, but really as a way of providing an introduction for Dennis and his work. And so I'm looking forward to having that conversation. As you've already heard, my name is David Schalliol. So I'm a sociologist who makes projects like photographs and films about the way that people connect with place, particularly in the context of inequality. And so today I'm going to really hopefully direct us towards a productive conversation about creative placemaking, about preservation, Assembly House 150, and the broader social context of all of this. So, just as by way of introduction, that I approach my work visually. So I'm interested in analyzing and representing community change and structural forces. And so these are things like that reproduce racial and class-based power through major transformations in the built environment, with an emphasis on repetition, pattern, contrast, and time. And so that can be whether from it's a major redevelopment project in Dubai, or the wholesale transformation of public housing in Chicago, or of important changes to mining communities in Hauts-de-France, all of which really demonstrate how change is not only written into the landscape, but suggests the importance of the world around us. And of course, I'm going to walk us up to my interest in Assembly House 150 and Dennis's work, with whom I first met in 2011, but I'll mainly let him talk about his work. So particularly given today's talk, I also wanted to let you know that I am involved in sort of traditional preservation activities. And so, for example, here are 3 photographs from my documentation of Bertrand Goldberg's Prentice Women's Hospital in Chicago. So I led the National Trust for Historic Preservation's documentation of the hospital before it was demolished. And maybe some projects in some of your backyards that had sort of tangential involvement with, but try to make sure that I document important sites like the Great Northern Elevator and Willett Park, both in Buffalo. And so just to say that I'm interested in a broad range of preservation activities, and particularly thinking about how to produce imagery that may help further preservation initiatives in relationship to sort of like demonstrating the importance of these places and their importance to the communities. Because preservation is something that's wrapped up with so much, from sort of naturally occurring affordable housing to addressing structural racism, you'll see it as a theme in my work that's not just about traditional preservation as well. And so one of the ways that that's clearest has to do with my interest in demolition. And so after moving to Chicago in 2002, I was really surprised that despite hundreds of buildings being demolished a year, seemingly no one was really paying attention to what was being lost. And particularly as the Great Recession took hold, it was especially clear that these demolitions were, really rapidly and radically transforming many neighborhoods in the city. So in 2012, I photographed 100 buildings throughout the city in a project supported by the Driehaus Foundation called To Be Demolished. And then I returned to them 4 years later, and then 10 years later, to see what happened. So here you get a glimpse from 4 years later. The resulting development patterns were crystal clear. So if a building was demolished on the wealthier, whiter part of the city in 2012, it was almost certainly replaced by a building. On the south and west sides of the city, it almost certainly wasn't. And so about 10 years later, I returned back to see, things have changed in that time period. Sadly, they really hadn't. So approximately 90% of the buildings in the south side of Chicago remain derelict lots, while 90% of the north side sites were built. Nearly all of those north side sites that weren't built, the 10% that weren't built, nearly all of them were someone's side yard for their house. And so taken together, this is really a crisis for our city and really our nation's physical history and contemporary equity. And of course, remember, this is just 1 year, 2012, and you can add up all of those years. And so we see what that looks like sort of lot by lot, but how does it line up with the social geography of the city? This is really important to me. And so people often say that there is only one map of Chicago, by which they mean that the power of racial and economic segregation is so strong that it defines so much of life. And so here we see an example of that. And so if we compare 3 different categories, here we could look at percent Black in 2020, we look at median household income in 2020, and we look at city-owned vacant lots in 2023, we see this really strong relationship. And I'll just draw your attention, of course, to these clusters on the west side and the south side of the city. And so just to think about this in context, so as of 2023, the city of Chicago alone owned more than 10,470 vacant lots. And seeing these 3 maps together make it really clear where they're located. And so this is the scale of the problem that we're addressing. And that we need to be involved with. But not all this work of mine is so direct in its approach to demolition, inequality and change, social and temporal. So I'm particularly interested in representing all of these forces in more abstract ways. And so, for example, I've been working on a project called Isolated Building Studies since 2006. One of the clear things about these buildings is that they were designed to have neighbors. They're urban buildings, they're tall, they're vertical, they're boxy buildings. They really fill out their sites. And so I photographed them in a way to clarify their intended relationship with their former peers. These isolated buildings remain, really demonstrating so much about property relations and structural disadvantage, as well as resilience. And so working on this project for so long, I guess 18 years at this point, means that I'm able to put together themes that explore within that. And so this could be the use of signs in mixed-use buildings. This could be the way that different buildings owners have used fences in their small front yards to show lot boundaries. And it could be thinking about lights, whether people might use lights for defensive purposes. They may be incidental to function, in the case of like an interior lighting of an L, or the ornament like we see in the background of the skyway in the lower right image here. In Buffalo, we can see similar elements operating. So where this pattern is really revealed by the demolitions, but the emphasis is on community growth over time and the particularity of place. And so here we can see these remarkable telescope houses because of these similar patterns of divestment, particularly on the east side of the city. And so with these Buffalo telescope houses, we can see the expansion of a single building, right, in response to demographic changes, to money and more. It's an example of a democratic vernacular change. This project then allows us to see change, but it's also about a particular structural form and how it merges in place. These are the kinds of things in which I'm interested, and that we might be able to learn then about something about our changing lives, the cities and social contexts from it. And as with isolated building studies, this project is also deeply about aesthetics and color, about using the power of different types of data to reveal what a building is and how it's used. And I'm especially interested in the glow of buildings at night, where we can see how a place is occupied without needing to see exactly what's going on inside. We can see these lights here as an example. So I'm going to talk about two more projects here. So back in Chicago, this photograph is from a project I started while working on To Be Demolished, that project about the 100 buildings that I photographed in the South, or actually throughout the city. This new project would ultimately become the documentary film The Area. It's about a group of Black South Side residents fighting for their community and respect, while a city-backed project by a freight transportation company eyed their corner of the city for the expansion of a freight yard. So it was more than just the gradual demolition of a building here and there. It was the swift and literal erasure of a neighborhood and the vibrant community that would be erased. And so, but the potential of this project is really so much different from the others because it's not a citywide survey of a problem, but a community study. And so the film spans more than 5 years of the expansion, displacement, and resettling process, focusing on community change, social, and physical. And particularly on the residents' fight. And so with that in mind, the project couldn't simply be that outsider perspective, that sort of like, particularly as a white guy with a connection to the University of Chicago, which is an institution which has its own tortured history with the South Side of the city. And so from the beginning, I spent time in this community with residents to see if there was even interest in a project about the issue. Ultimately, it's a collaboration with residents like co-producer and neighborhood activist Deborah Payne, seen here on the right and left, whose message the film promotes. One of Deborah's lessons that's highlighted by the film is about community engagement, about building relationships with neighbors and others to resist the forces that literally tear apart neighborhoods, providing a broad-based community support when things do go awry. And so with that spirit, Deborah and I hope that the film reveals some of the mechanisms through which structural racism and other forms of power operate, but it also reveals the potential and promise of community action. And so for that reason, we particularly savor opportunities to talk with people about the film and to use this as a focal point to generate other forms of change. And so finally, we can get to this project that connected me with Dennis that was so closely aligned with that lesson that I learned with Deborah. Back in 2009, in the midst of the last recession, historian Michael Carrier and I started working on a research project about the do-it-yourself attempts to address the problems that community members see in their own neighborhoods. This is the work that he and I were already doing in Milwaukee and Chicago, and we saw in so many other places around us. Our collaboration would ultimately become The City Creative, which is published by the University of Chicago Press. This multi-year, multi-location study utilizes archival research, documentary photography, interviews, participant observation, and site visits of more than 200 different organizations and groups of people in more than 40 cities across the country. Our work is not just about the destruction of places I've really foregrounded, heretofore, but really about its recreation through efforts that can redistribute resources, that can connect people, and actually produce something. And I want to emphasize that here, that we're particularly interested in these efforts that are about redistributing resources, connecting people, and actually producing something, whether that be food, job skills, or practical physical preservation. And so, for example, we can look at sites like The Plant, in a former meat packing plant in Chicago. It builds on its back-of-the-yard heritage and location to be an incubator of environmentally conscious food production. The site was specifically chosen by its founders because it can provide jobs in a neighborhood that lost so many during the 1970s and 1980s. This incubation is interconnected with businesses supporting each other and working to find ways to collaborate on projects like Weiner Beer's use of local yeasts for its beer. In central cities like Chicago, Cleveland, and Detroit that are covered with derelict lots, real preservation failures, people are addressing them. And this is happening everywhere. We see these farms, small and large, in cities affected by depopulation and housing loss. They use a small scale to refill blocks affected by decline. The decline I mentioned before, repopulating spaces, connecting neighbors, and producing a product, good and healthy food. Shifting from above to the ground, we can see these efforts from across the country. And in places where buildings remain, organizations are at work using them and protecting them. So we can think of Project Row Houses in New Orleans, which foregrounds the arts, in Houston, which foregrounds the arts, but uses housing destined to be demolished as gallery spaces, as well as affordable housing developed with Rice University. In Indianapolis, Big Car Collective's Tube Factory is an art space that also includes an affordable housing component. The organization is worried about the gentrifying effects of their move into a neighborhood, and so they worked with a not-for-profit developer to acquire and rehabilitate 16 nearby houses, many of which had been derelict and unoccupied, to be made as permanent affordable housing. And as we see in the rehabilitation of derelict churches, which are experiencing declining membership, like in Assembly House 150, which we'll of course learn more about today. It's gone from one artist's vision, from something original to a dynamic job training, architecture education, and community center. I'm grateful to have met Dennis back in 2011 and first started photographing some impressive work the following year. I think one of the great things about this being a long-term project is we get to see the challenges and opportunities that affect the survival or expansion of a project like this one, and in this case, really literally. When Michael and I first started talking with Dennis, he wouldn't even acquire the church until 3 years later. It goes even further than what you see in this image. And by the way, that first photograph from 2014 was made almost 10 years ago to the day. So it was almost 10 years ago to the day. And of course, it's not just about the physical change, it's about the way that people like Dennis, the AH 150 staff and volunteers and SACRA participants socially and physically make and remake community. And it's this community effect that makes this project so much more than one person's initial idea, but the way that so many people come together to make all these initiatives what they are. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this from Dennis himself. And so as by way of a conclusion, I'll say that like with Assembly House 150, I'm inspired by the project that can help us see how we create meaningful change for all members of our community by bringing people together, redistributing resources, and producing something of meaning, and often protect our built heritage in the process. Thank you.
By way of introduction, I think it's important for me to make clear that I understand that buildings are very fluid things. And oftentimes I think we work ourselves into a kind of illusion that buildings are very fixed and provide the essence of stability, which is oftentimes the case, but buildings are composed of many pieces of things that are constantly changing. I think they're a lot like bodies, actually, that the human body is composed of so many pieces of things, all of which are fluid. And I think of buildings in quite the same way, that the buildings are constantly breathing, they're expanding, they're contracting, they're shifting, you're creaking on the stair, a drop of rain is maybe getting in and doing its thing. So a building is quite an animated thing. And I think this idea is captured very beautifully in Stuart Brand's book, How Buildings Learn, which really gets to the essence of thinking of a building is an evolving thing in the world, very much affected by forces of change, growth over time, or change over time. And for me, that was a very personal experience when I came to Buffalo in the early 2000s, and I began to work as a laborer in the demolition industry in Buffalo. And that was a time when the mayor had instituted what had come to be known as the 5 and 5 plan, which was a plan to demolish 5,000 buildings in 5 years' time. And this is from early 2000s when the mayor had instituted a plan to clear 5,000 buildings in 5 years' time. And Jenny, I think I'll just let you go ahead and, I'm going to talk really fast, so you'll probably feel free to just advance the slides. And I was moving through the city finding pieces of things. And at this particular moment, this image is a really nice one where I found a group of folks who were working in the building deconstruction industry at that time, and they were doing piecemeal harvesting of large-scale building parts. And to me, there was a beauty to that. If you just go back to it 1 second, the beauty to that image of thinking about something which is sort of transformative, oftentimes erasing buildings from very blighted neighborhoods. And yet, when I saw these facades in motion, and particularly in the sun, they almost seemed like they were having fun. Like there was some playfulness, there was some whimsy, there was a surreality to it. And I couldn't help be taken by the seriousness of it at the same time, this kind of animated sense of wonder. And that really got me thinking about ways to work with debris. And I for many years, while I was working on demolition sites, I was also collecting material from demolition sites. And in the next image, you could see some residual pieces of things that were assembled and reassembled and photographed multiple times over. In the next slide, this instance actually is using parking lot attendant booth and 7 porch columns and continually reformulating and documenting the material. So I was very interested in the kind of intensification of the flows that happen every day in instances of that maybe we're unaware of. So it wasn't long that then I was fortunately invited to start to exhibit some of this stuff. And this was at the Birchfield Penny Art Center in 2010. Suspension of large amounts of assembled detritus along with some new construction materials, and thinking about ways to suggest both an homage to places that were foregone, but also thinking of it as a kind of speculation for the future, some kind of combination of those two things together. And when I worked in this vein, assembling the detritus for almost 10 years, I then began to think about what it'd be like to live in an environment that was continually affected by change and growth and was really ever evolving. And so that led me to work on the Fargo House project, which is actually, I'm inside of it right now. This is a project that I have continued to work on since 2009. The site is two residential structures on the west side of the city of Buffalo that were more or less given to me at a time when they were slated for demolition. This is the main house, an 1890s era Victorian, which was the bulldozers were ready to take it down really when I acquired it. And as a result, it was extensively stripped and looted. And my attitude and approach to working on the house was to basically treat it as a palette, as a canvas, to continually assemble and excavate material. And to kind of think of the space as ever evolving around me, to work with a lot of secondhand pieces of things, nothing that's you would pay a lot of money for, a lot of things that are actually even given to me. But there's elements that were found at estate sales and flea markets and thrift stores. And actually, these are all the places where pieces of the city coalesce, and the less visible flows are at these sites. And I think that they're captured very beautifully at these moments. These are like these points of connection where all these moving pieces of the city find themselves. And so I would go to these places over many years and collect and bring them back to the house and assemble them inside and then excavate through the layers. And I'm really looking for spaces in between the objects and the surfaces, and thinking about the relationship of the larger container of the dwelling to the objects assembled inside. So if you want to scroll through some of those, and then we could kind of move on into other things. I have an extensive collection of antique and primitive doll houses, which are a component of this. And sometimes those things lend themselves towards photographic projects that are necessarily a part of this. And then in around 2012, 2013, I started doing exhibitions and other forms of public event at the house. So this was a gallery project to transform a bedroom and a kitchen into a first floor gallery and host things inside. And as Jenny mentioned, educators were coming to me and they were asking if they could bring students, and other people, creatives, would come and do projects with me. And actually, this is the photograph from David's exhibition when he did the Telescope House show here, which was a really lovely time. It was cool to see those things assemble, his photographs presented in the house. And then I started working with building industry tradespeople, and I would invite them to the house to do projects with me. And this is a project by a plumber, Jamila Green, who I spoke with at length about her approach to renovation, restoration, construction in the city, and my approach. And I commissioned her along with 7 others to build small house models inspired by our dialogues. And the caveat was that they had to use only the materials that they worked with in their trade. So the plumber had to work with plumbing parts, and the electrician had to work with electrical parts, and the mason had to work with masonry material. And that really led me into thinking about this kind of space of construction in a more open way, and building very strong relationships with people who were in the construction industry, thinking about working together on a larger initiative. And that is about the time that I was fortunately able to acquire the Assembly House site, which is the former Immaculate Conception Church, which is located in the Lower West Side, central downtown area. This is an 1860s era neo-Gothic now interior, which was basically left to decay. It was virtually abandoned for about 10 years. And this is owing to the decommissioning of about 200 churches by the Archdiocese between 1990 and 2005. So you had a significant amount of really wonderful spaces that really were left to decay. The building had no services to speak of, no water, no plumbing, no electric. It had no heat at all at the time. So the idea was really to bring together building industry professionals, artisans, students, apprentices, the old and new materials, really to think about all these pieces of things coming together, all these flows. So before I was thinking about the flows of physical objects, and I still think very much about those things, but I'm also thinking about so many other forms of flow, and thinking about the building itself as a condenser, collector, and a catalyst for kind of reorganizing these very many pieces that are constantly shifting around and coming in relationship to each other. So inside the space now, as David showed this a more recent image, everything has been built by teams of students, apprentices, working with our workshop instructors, designers and builders on staff, as well as people in the community who come in to teach specialized skills in projects that range from carpentry into tile work to even electrical and stained glass, for example. So we've put together a really fantastic collaborative of individuals who are invested in skills training, and in so doing, working with people who we bring in from the community to learn those skills and to build out the site into what is becoming a destination in the city. So there's a kind of a dual purpose to the site. Really, is it's an educational site, but it's also a cultural attraction, and it is, I think, some place that I hope that people can become put back in touch with things that we're increasingly losing our points of touch with. So the organization's mission is to create inspiring, wondrous environments for all to experience the art of building. My background is in architecture. I've been teaching in architecture for over 20 years. And as an artist, I think about making environments that are extraordinary and trying to bring people into spaces that take them out of the world and reframe the way that they enter back into it. And so I think that the church is an example for me of a place that really endeavors to remove people and then to resituate them. And we do that by putting people in touch with stuff that they are oftentimes not able to be put into contact with. We focus very much on high-level craft. So a lot of the things that we build inside we aspire to make them really, really well. We aim to strengthen, if you go back to that one slide there where you got to, thank you for doing this, by the way, Jen, you're doing a great job. Strengthening the connections to tools, materials, places, and one another. And I think this is an increasingly important one to me, is to promote the agency of other people to shape the environments where they live, work, and play. So as someone who has been involved in architecture education for a very long period of time, I'm also, I form a lot of my connections to people who are very much outside the world of architecture proper. And I'm interested in ways that people who are outside of that discipline can begin to take agency over the way that they live, how they shape the spaces that they live in, whether it means a garage that they turn into some special playroom for themselves, or a living space in their own home that allows the sun to come in and hit the table in a particular way, or what have you, or even in a neighborhood, even some place where groups of people can get together to make something special. And I think that it's very important that other people understand the power that the built environment has on their lives and their ability to shape it, even if they're not coming from a discipline like architecture. So so we can just run through some of these slides. These are some of the build outs happening inside. There's a quarter house project where we've been teaching various exercises in Victorian era craft that are folded into a kind of collage-like reconfiguration of a quarter of a house. And there's many workshop specialists who have been delivering skills training as a component of this one. This is the workshop. It's very important to me that the workshop be located on the high altar. I mean, that has a very special transformation. You go from the ritual of the religious ceremony and all the traditions associated with what was at the time a Roman Catholic Church, into now the ritual of work, which takes place on the high altar. And all the workshop tables were built from the former pews of the church. You can't quite see, well, you can kind of make it on this image, but there's one of the first creative acts I did was to paint the image of a hammer over the traces of the crucifix, which were residually remnant there on the left side. So there's this idea that the heart of what was once the religious space, ceremonial space, is still the heart of the environment inside. We've realized very many projects over the years that have built out special environments in the interior. And this was an early one where not much was going on. And the goal was really to make two really signature towers that would kind of intersect in the transept crossing. This was done with John Zizovich, who's a professor, was just retired at Cornell University, and a close friend of mine, who helped to conceptualize this project. And you can see in the background the opening up of the plasterwork in the ceiling. And a lot of the work that has been done has intended to stabilize the building, which was extensively compromised over the years of neglect. And I've tended to do that by selectively peeling away layers, framing pieces of the building in new ways. So it's much like in the house that I showed you, where we're working through the layers of assembled material, thinking of this space of the church in the same way. The goal is not to go back to how it was in 1860 or 1890 or whatever stage. The goal is really to think about all these assembled layers and ways that they could frame and advance our understanding of the complexity of the building, highlight new aesthetic, emotive possibilities that are kind of brought to light, and really add new stories to the mix. So pieces of stone that would have ordinarily been covered can be revealed in new ways. This is John Hulley, who if many of you may be familiar with the Darwin Martin House restoration project in Buffalo. So John led the interior restoration of that as a general contractor for 12 years while they worked on the Martin House. And John is regularly with us doing skills workshops. Here he's working on a furniture restoration workshop. So we've been able to bring together a lot of really, really talented people who have exceptional knowledge, and working with those who are part of the program. So you can keep going through the slides there. You can kind of see some of the constructions that have been built inside. What you'll begin to see, I hope, is that as these projects kind of take shape, they're all built with teams of folks working through the various training initiatives. Sometimes we're keying into old materials or reused or reclaimed materials and using those materials in new ways. Oftentimes, in this case, we're maybe just showing how to lay floor, but then also what else can we do with these floorboards? And sometimes we also have been able to bring back people who've been a part of this training initiative to be instructors or people in the design build team. So I do endeavor whenever, to build that culture out. And so this is CJ Tice, who actually has been with us for many years now, who was a student in one of the earlier programs, and now he's an instructor with us. You can see the two towers rising up as they were in there. This is also a wonderful shot by David. You can go a little bit faster through some of these images here. So this, if this is possible to, I don't know if it's possible to play that image. It probably isn't, because that was actually a slide, the 3D model. But I would want to show. We'll see it in a further. I don't think that'll play now. But keep going through there. You can kind of see the way that as the structures begin to evolve, the way it frames the interior of the space in new ways, opens up new views, reorients your perspective on where you are. So each environment that you shift into may completely reframe and stop there. So here we have, if the idea really is that what's happening inside, and I think you can see it clearly in this image, is that I think of this as really a kind of miniature city, right? That's a miniature city that's evolving, where each of these mini structures has a specific purpose, a specific program associated with it. So it may be a pavilion-like area for having our lunches, a dining room area, a library that's like a mini museum, an area that's like a model house, and an area that may be for the shop or for the books or classroom-like activities. So each of these kind of mini structures has a specific programmatic purpose, and they're kind of rising and falling all the time. And I like the idea that this kind of place is evolving with these microstructures that are being built by people in the surrounding city in order to craft another version of the city. So there's some of the programs that we have, just kind of go through some of these. Is we have a 12-week construction skills training program. SOCRA is an acronym, as Jenny mentioned earlier. It's the Society for the Advancement of Construction-Related Arts. We have a Model City Builders, which is a 4-week summer program for high school students. You're probably aware that high school students have very few opportunities to work with tools these days, unfortunately. And we have an apprenticeship program, which is actually for graduates of the SOCRA initiative. And it's a 6-month paid gig to work on higher level skill building with some of our master artisans that we bring in to deliver those skills. The SOCRA program is to date has been a 12-week initiative. It aimed to have work readiness and job placement in that, and to basically to work on familiarity to tools and materials. You can kind of keep going through some of these SOCRA slides, show some of the people at work. We've got a carpentry and woodworking focus. We provide introductions to many different trades. And you can see this is an introductory project. If we go back to that one, that one's the intro project here is a fun one. The students design and build a framing device for an antique tool. So it's basically, we talk about tools, what they did, we share our awareness of, do research on the tools, and then build a display device that houses and showcases that tool in a creative way. And in so doing, they'll basically become familiar with every tool in the woodshop. So you can kind of see some of the projects under construction here. There's introduction to hand tools. We do drafting, drawing exercises as well. We do a lot of focus on math. Do the math through a lot of focus on the tape measure and on building models. Sometimes the models are scale models of other pieces inside the building. If you go back to that statistics, so we've got 120 people have come through that program so far. Employers in many different fields: residential, commercial, construction, finishing trades, cabinet making, millwork. I'm very interested in preservation-oriented trades. I'm particularly working with those in the stained glass industry, plaster industry, wood window industry. So I'm always looking for opportunities to build stronger relationships with industries with that form of focus. Graduations are actually kind of a cool, super cool thing. There's CJ again. There was a fellow that I mentioned earlier. So I think one of the reasons we had a lot of success with this is that we bring together really renowned people who are oftentimes they're aging out. They want to share opportunities to share their skills. We do field trips to many of the cool places in Buffalo, a lot of job sites, workspaces, amazing historic buildings. And we in the process work on signature projects that we realize often as commission work that is now being done in the community outside of the church. We can go through, there's a stained glass workshop with Kitty. We can kind of cycle through some of these as a furniture workshop with Jim Cordes, wood windows, Will Blanda, just Larry Costanza doing a fine home building workshop. Wood window visit to John Gulick's shop. Taking a tour of places in the city. Working with Jim Cordes on reclaiming pieces of the altar, turning that into a new table. The high school program is a 4-week program. So the kids in that initiative will, we want to show some images of that. The kids will work on making funky toolboxes that are inspired by architecture in the city. So we'll walk around together. We look at buildings, and they'll learn about buildings, and then they make something that's a toolbox that's inspired by some of the buildings that they see and their own interests that they develop in architecture. Also have the opportunity to do workshops with others. And then the AH Craft, that's the 6-month paid apprenticeship. We're really focused on finer skill building. And if you get into that, we can see some of the images of working on things like tile work, projects that's in the vestibule. We're aiming to remake that vestibule into a very beautiful, welcoming space. And then, you can kind of see that's just took that yesterday or a couple of days ago. So that's starting to evolve into a nice welcome area, borrowing on a lot of kind of Victorian era craft and tradition. And then some of this, this is building a prototype for a pavilion that we're aiming to market. So we're developing a few products, and this is a very well crafted outdoor room. It's built from a sapele hardwood. And this is some of the jobs that people are getting out of the programs are aiming then to take those skills that they're learning with us and then go work for companies like Forest Materials to do some of that higher end work. And we throw really good parties too. So the events that we've had are well attended, and we turn the whole place into a kind of an otherworldly environment for those who can gather and kind of mingle amongst the many different installations that are inside. So, it's been intending to talk a little bit more about some of the commissioned work, which comes later. But seeing as, I've extended, I'm sorry, I apologize for extending the presentation due to the technical stuff. So again, I'm happy if you want to jump in, Jenny, or I can show some of these, whatever you think would be appropriate.
I can probably buzz through them pretty quickly. And
yeah, okay.
I guess add that I've written a couple of articles about Assembly House, and one in particular about the future of preservation and the Northland pattern wall. So I think this is a really incredible piece of artwork and representation of SACRA's training program.
In this project, we were using pieces of the machine molds that were left behind the former Niagara Machine and Toolworks building, and the folks who were renovating that site commissioned us to turn that into a new public wall mural. And so we used pieces of the left behind relics as well as interpretive maps of the city to generate that 3D pattern. This is a porch project that we did for an affordable housing project on the west side, which is basically taking a house which was once a single and then being converted into a double and adding 2 porches to it in a kind of like Victorian twisty way, where we were borrowing on certain examples of the detail-oriented craft that you see in the surrounding neighborhood.
And David, feel free to join in this conversation as well. I think maybe one of your images is from the new normal porch in your.
Yeah, I think David took that.
Yeah, that last photograph is one. We mistakenly forgot to remove the trash can, but that's okay.
Well, that's the sociologist in you, David. Just wants to capture it exactly as it is.
That's right. It's true. It's really fantastic to be able to visit some of these work sites, to get a chance to interact with Dennis and the other participants in the program as they're really building out both this project and others. And, again, if you put it in that broader context of the work in which I have an interest, where we're thinking about community development and these multiple levels, and as you've just heard articulated by Dennis, I think it's really clear why, again, why Michael and I felt like it was appropriate to feature Assembly House 150 and this really remarkable work on the cover of our book.
That's great. Yeah, and this project in particular also is, and Dennis probably mentioned this already, but People United for Sustainable Housing, or Push Buffalo, really incredible work, that organization that's doing work in Buffalo around affordable housing and as well as creative placemaking in other ways.
This project was kind of a riff on these. If you go to the first slide, if any of you have been to the Met and seen the in the period room, the previous slide here, the Metcalf House interior, which was a house that was demolished, was located in Buffalo, a stone's throw from where the church is now, and this whole room has been reconstructed in the Met. And so I was really interested in kind of keying into that period of time when you had these really intimate interiors, all crafted out of wood, oftentimes, kind of like rescaling the sense of space when you kind of enter into a space. And also it has a kind of a cabinet-like quality to it, in the interior, is hearkening to the cabinet room. So we want to build the kind of version of that space. And that's a project that we've been working on over the last couple of years, adding to it as we go. Various pieces in the next slides, you can kind of see that project kind of evolving, and it's got it's actually pieces of it are on wheels, so it can be rolled in and rolled out of the quarterhouse. And folks have contributed many pieces, from inlay floor to cabinet drawers to stained glass elements. This is a project that we just finished this last year. It was a big commission to do about 2,000 square feet of space in the Birchfield Penny Art Center's museum. Basically, the charge was the director from the museum came to us about 4 years ago and said, we want a space like you have in the church in our museum. So they hired us to basically turn their education gallery, education space, into this immersive environment for art making, art discovery. And many of those techniques of craft are folded into the making of the work, from the tables that were all done by the team at Assembly House. We worked with a historic painter who taught skills of historic painting as we adorned the walls of the interior. A lot of specialty carvings by folks who are working on the design build side, fabricating a lot of pieces that then held antique architectural elements and antique furniture pieces that became part of the walls. So you'd get these kind of built-ins that house objects that can be discovered, played with, tinkered with, and there's these kind of large wall pieces that showcase elements that can be brought to a table and studied and drawn and modeled with. And so, it's very much encouraged to engage with that space very tactily. And again, I think that's one of the big takeaways here, is that in this particular age, when we're so attracted to all these kind of to the robots in our pockets, that to find spaces and moments in time where we can reconnect with the things, the immediacy of stuff right around us. And my desire is to find more ways for us to do that.
All right. Well, thank you both for fantastic presentations. So visually interesting, and such rich stories around how we care for place, and the future of preservation, the future of education. I'm hearing a lot of mutual interests in place, and also interesting how we've all interacted with or reacted to demolition in different ways. So I guess I have so many different questions. Let me just check to see, though. I think I have a question from Mitchell Grubler in the chat. I noticed what looked like a Queen Anne rectory or parish house next door. What is happening with that building? I think that was earlier.
Yeah. That would be, I believe, related to the rectory that's next door to the church. So once there were three buildings, a part of the singular parcel. You had the school, you had the church, and you had the rectory. Well, they were all separated out into three distinctly different parcels. The school is still maintained by Buffalo Public Schools Adult Education Program. The church is being stewarded by Assembly House 150, and then the rectory building was bought by a developer because it was a very easy kind of condo conversion or apartment conversion. So it's very nice. They did a nice job with that, and those are rented out, those units that were next door. I think they're always nervous that the church is going to fall on them, but so thankfully that hasn't happened yet.
And then another comment in the chat: so thoroughly inspiring on so many levels. Fantastic. So I guess maybe we can begin the conversation, and please feel free to put more questions in the chat. But what are key takeaways for preservationists when it comes to creative placemaking? How can they or should they be more welcoming in sort of their efforts to welcome creative practice into efforts to save buildings and serve communities? And I'd like to open that up to either of you. Maybe David first. Do you have any specific recommendations for preservationists around creative placemaking?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things, one piece of it is just to say that creative placemaking should absolutely be a tool for preservationists. And I think that we tend to think about the way that creative placemaking has traditionally been sort of like articulated and I think really expressed has been in this simply based on this idea that we can bring people together in a kind of place. I think that's an important thing that's important for us to do. But the thing that Mike and I really try to emphasize in the City Creative is the way that we can use placemaking activities to do more than that we can bring people together, that we can be redistributive in how we're taking our resources, making sure they go to the places that most need them, and that also they can kind of produce something. And I think about as preservation as being one piece of what's being presented, and that really foregrounding the role of place, of the built environment, of architectural preservation, community preservation, and seeing all those things kind of intertwined as an important strategy for sort of preservation, maybe writ large, is, from my perspective, the way that we should be moving. And I hope that you see in the presentation where I'm trying to link these sort of the catastrophic effects of structural racism, of deindustrialization, of class-based politics, of all sorts of things, and the way that they wreak havoc in the city. And I think that as preservationists, we're often interested in trying to address the same sets of issues, right? To address the way that the city's been remade by those things. And so for me, I think if we can reorient or orient towards ensuring that we're working towards the preservation of the built environment, and simultaneously doing all this additional kind of work, I think work that Dennis has demonstrated right here today, is, from my perspective, where we should be going, and it allows us to build bridges and be sort of like a amazingly part of the sort of contemporary life of the city. And I guess I don't want to emphasize simply the city, but to think about the way that people connect with place in cities, rural areas, and those in between.
Thanks. Yeah, Dennis, any comments for preservationists and creative placemaking?
Well, I mean, I think that what I've tried to communicate in the talk is that there's a lot of nuance to things in the preservation world. And, so frequently we're encouraged to think about the place as a fixed, and you want to fix something, you're going to have it be the way you once understood it to be, or how, what it may have looked like in a particular moment in time. And I think if you allow yourself to understand that the buildings are all the pieces of which are constantly moving, then the shift you can move from thinking about fixing the place or fixing the site to a management of its flows. So managing the movements of things can be a way to approach preservation, I think. So, and understand that all things are moving at different rates, and these things are shifting all the time. So trying to move into a time-based understanding of the pieces that are involved. And those pieces are not just material, they're also social. So once you understand, then I think that all those moving parts are always being recalibrated with each other anyway, right? That's what's happening, which is happening so subtly because we're categorizing all these things and we don't take account of it. But if we embrace the idea that all these things are shifting around, and we try intentionally to manage how they move in relationship to one another, then I think that opens up a lot of possibilities.
Great. So maybe next, if you could talk a little bit, David, about how you select the cases. As I mentioned earlier in the introduction, I thought your book was really very informative, and I really enjoyed how it moved into specific cases, and provided a really nuanced view of creative placemaking as something that can either be even detrimental to place or in community, or something that can really aid community. So could you talk about how you chose the cases that you write about?
Sure. So, as I said in the presentation, so we visited more than 40 cities and met with more than 200 different sort of groups, many of which are sort of formal organizations, but others were sort of informal groups of people that are getting together to do something. We try to cast as wide a net as possible. And so we wanted to look at, who are the kinds of projects, or what are the kinds of projects that people are talking a lot about. And so here we might think about the kind of work that was being done and continues to be done in Detroit's sort of inner core, and so the redevelopment of downtown, and the way that's being performed, but also try to look at the other kinds of stories that are happening around the country, and ultimately really internationally, but that are going around the country that are really community-based projects that are trying to figure out how to address a local social need. And so what this meant was talking to a lot of people. I mean, literally just walking into record shops, or walking into community cafes, or walking into whatever in a city, and asking about interesting things that are going on. Along with working with sort of longstanding activists, artists, preservationists, academics, and others who are involved in these projects. And so we really try to cast that wide net. And from there, when thinking about how to feature projects in the book, the idea was to really think about what are the lessons that those projects can contribute to this broader understanding of creative placemaking, and again, that community emphasis of work that's not only about bringing people together, but it's also about redistributing resources, and it's also about sort of creating something productive. And so, I think just to continue to focus on the work of Dennis and Assembly House 150. As I said, that we really see all of the things that we heard in this presentation, the emphasis on adaptive reuse of a site, thinking about the way that the project is something that has a clear artistic vision, and also has a component that is about ensuring that people can continue to be employed in these industries. They can address employment issues, can address those deep issues of inequality that I mentioned elsewhere in the presentation, and that has this real product then, not only of sort of job training and of the physical site and of bringing people together, but like really so much more. And so we're really trying to think about organizations that can do that kind of work. The other piece that we did focus on in the book was we did have a whole chapter that focuses on Milwaukee, and the role of sort of how, if we look back in time, rather than thinking about now as being kind of only where we are, but acknowledging the histories of places, we can see deep lines, these threads of urban agriculture about caring for broader communities, about activating places, that we can see these as really being interwoven into our city's histories. And so we're looking particularly at Milwaukee and the way that has happened, but then also was sort of torn apart by some of the large-scale urban reform work that was being done in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. Particularly, we focus on some work that was being done around interstate highway expansion. But so sort of like seeing then how, if we focus on the history of a place, allow us to see that the story that we're telling about the present is not simply about the present, but is deeply connected to the history. And so we also wanted to focus on these pieces that allowed us to say, in order to understand what's going on now, we need to understand how things have been changing over time, and then what we can do more in the future.
I think it's interesting that you also chose Assembly House as the primary photo for the cover of your book. It's such an amazing image.
Yeah, I mean, it was, when Michael and I were talking about what we'd like to see for the cover of the book, we were trying to think about a project that we really felt like embodied that sort of trajectory of a project that has the capacity to move, far beyond any particular person's efforts and become something that can embody so much of what's going on in a broader community and what's going on with, a variety of other initiatives, and just really highlight that physical transformation. In this case, seeing a sacred space being transformed into something that continued to serve a community focus also seemed like a major plus. So anyway, we can talk more about that later, but lots of reasons that Dennis is featured on the cover and its work with Simply House 150.
So I just saw a question come in to the chat. This is an anonymous attendee. One of the most impressive aspects of this presentation, in addition to the astonishing builds, was your ability to bring the community and trades in support, teaching, participation in your efforts. Can you speak more about that part of the process?
Long history of, it's a blue collar town. There's a lot of people who were invested in the trades in Buffalo, and a lot of really talented builders in Western New York. And getting to know many of them over the last 10 years, certain commonalities. I mean, it's no secret that there's a dire need for skilled tradespeople. But even in the world of fine craft, I mean, I think you have a situation that's probably more dire, where many people who have a lot of skills and knowledge, been doing the work for many, many years, are aging out. And it's increasingly difficult to find people with the wherewithal, the interest to continue on those traditions. But this is not a new problem. I mean, this is something people have been talking about for 150 years. So I think it's, sometimes I feel like I'm like some William Morris guy when I'm up and talking about this, like, craft stuff. And it's not that I don't sympathize with that. I certainly do. I also think, to add my own take to it, I think there's a matter of individual power, I think, that comes when you know how to do something. And so, bringing together people who intentionally want to share what it is that they know how to do. And I think that's been a very special thing for me to witness, is that they really do want to share. And even though we pay people, maybe instructors coming in to deliver a workshop or a special skill set, many of them don't take the money. They just want to come, hang out, and want to do stuff. And I think that's really cool too. I think one of the larger challenges associated with it these days is that cultures around work are shifting around, and it's we deal with a lot of issues around transportation, people not having the transportation to get around to various job sites, or being in situations where they can easily move around, or having other obstacles, and that's a big part of our challenges, is finding people who have this kind of fit the bill of, like, they're need the opportunity, they want the opportunity, but they're also well positioned to take advantage of that opportunity. And because there's expensive programs to run, we're investing a lot of energy, time, money, resources into these training initiatives, and so we do want to find people who are, they want to do something with it for themselves. I mean, I on a generalized level, I think everyone who participates is going to learn something, going to take away something. Usually, it's take away many positive things. But we're also interested in trying to get people into arenas in the trades, and a lot of times it's the old timers. They're able to kind of activate those interests, and they often, by this time, they have the patience too. Like, my patience is very, very low relative to some of these guys who come to the sites, because they've been through all the stuff that I've been through 30 years ago. And they've now reached this totally even keel where no matter what happens, they're just like, oh, yeah. And that's fantastic, to be able to learn from people who have absorbed all the lessons and, and all the freakouts, and can at this point maintain a calm that is very impressive to me. So bringing together those folks has been a key part of it, and continuing to find people who really want to share those skills and interests. And those, there's many places throughout the United States who have that kind of energy, of knowledge and skill. And I think the Buffalo situation is a unique one. It's a small community, smallish town, and I think, part of my efforts have really been to try to connect the dots among, the places that are, in my mind, doing really cool kind of off the radar stuff. I don't know if that answered the question, but.
Yeah. David, did you want to add anything or?
I mean, I think it's great. What Jenna said.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, you both, and actually me included, have this sort of interest in materiality and built environment and place, but and their connection to social systems and patterns in the community. I wonder if you two are also educators, and I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the connection to or successful pedagogical approaches to inspiring students to think about these patterns in the built environment, think more deeply about them and their own agency in the world. And maybe if you wanted to comment too on the role of universities, David, because that's another thing that I noticed in reading your book. Many of these creative placemaking projects have a connection to universities. For instance, Rick Lowe's project had connections to multiple universities. Dennis, I know you teach at UB, and there's some connection there. Can you speak to that as well?
So I can jump in here just to switch things up a little. But yeah, I guess so 2 parts. So then thinking about this notion of how to inspire as educators and really get students sort of to be proactively oriented towards sort of or understanding and engaging with the city, and then also thinking about sort of maybe a broader interest in the role of the university. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the main thing that seems to be most to most drive student connection and maybe agency is working on projects that they can really make their own. And so one of the things that I really try to do, in addition to connect students with people who are doing inspiring work, is also just to ensure that students have the capacity to pursue their own kinds of projects. And so that's even going to be in classes that maybe you wouldn't necessarily think of as being connected to these issues. It's still being really important to ensure that students are out there. And so whether that be through some sort of research project, maybe it's through working on photography, maybe it's interviewing people and connecting with others, but just making sure that people create the actual physical and social connections with others in the city, I think goes a long way towards inspiring sort of not only a greater appreciation and understanding of what's going on in place, but also to think about their own role with that. And, so maybe it's a general answer, and there have been a variety of ways I've done that, through research projects, through taking students on class trips, to actually having students directly engaged on doing research with organizations who are involved with similar issues to the ones that we're talking about here. So aiding, I'll give one example. One of the courses that Michael teaches at NSOE has led to his involvement with an organization called Adams Garden Park, and he connected my class. It's called Race Matters. It's a first-year seminar, so it's a class that's for first-year students at the college. And what we did was we worked with this organization, Adams Garden Park, to identify through analysis of building inspection records and ownership records, to see who the absentee landlords were in the community, and if it made a difference if buildings were owned by absentee landlords based on the kinds of infractions they were getting. So this is about the physical dereliction of rental properties. And so we're able to find that, yes, there was an association between the sort of absentee landlord ownership of buildings and the higher number of building inspector violations, which is something that this neighborhood organization can then use to advocate for better, better investment in the community. And so we're involved in those kinds of projects. Then the last thing I'll just say quickly then, I think it's really interesting to think about the role of colleges and universities in their capacity to support projects in a way that don't necessarily have to have a financial product. And I think one of the things that allows me as a scholar to continue to engage in these very long-term projects is the support of an institution that's not necessarily interested in the money I'm going to generate directly, but is instead interested in the other products that I produce. And so I think as we think about that in a more general sense, we think about the roles that not-for-profit organizations, that foundations and others have in this work, that really the innovative work comes from a situation where we don't have to worry about producing a profit, but instead we can think about other kinds of outcomes.
Dennis, did you want to add anything about the role of universities in through what you've observed and pedagogical practice successes?
Well, I work with students from many different backgrounds, at the university level and also at Assembly House. And one thing that my approach shares is I like to get people into the city whenever possible. I like to get them engaged, walking around, encountering things. I often think that discovering architecture is kind of like being an ornithologist. It doesn't matter where you are; you find the birds that are interesting to you because that's where the birds are. Right? There's birds everywhere, and I think of buildings like that. The buildings all over. They may not be the most extraordinary building you've ever encountered, but there's still going to be something interesting. And to get people to recognize that when they're moving around wherever they are. And then another key component is, in my opinion, that to have something on the desk that you work on that's about this big is very important. So whether you're an architecture student or working in our training initiatives at the church or what have you, I think there's something about having something like this big that you can work on for a while, and it's physical. And then you can hopefully the lessons you glean working on that thing, then you can apply them at different scales. You understand when you wrestle with something at this scale, and then we can try to help understand, well, what are the consequences of that, other scales of experience and other contexts with different materials and so on. But I think that those lessons, I think, become very real because you literally learn by doing something.
Right. I'm noticing a few comments. I think these are primarily just comments in the chat from Julie, who says, from a Toronto resident of a historically significant downtown residential neighborhood, late 19th century, preserved, owned by the University of Toronto and rented to tenants who have for decades worked to prevent demolition related to University of Toronto expansion. Our neighborhood is the Huron Sussex. This has been an excellent webinar. Great. Thank you for the compliment. And yes, that is another observation about universities and demolition and changes to the built environment. Certainly universities can do wonderful things to, for instance, fund the work that educators are doing with community. It can also exacerbate tensions with communities. So let's hope our universities can all do a better job at preventing those negative effects of university expansion.
And if I can plug,
Yeah,
so the
please.
Hyde Park Historical Society in Chicago has been working, and I've been involved in this effort, has been working to try to create a new historic district surrounding the University of Chicago to maintain the built heritage and to directly address some of the issues raised by the commenter here. So anyway, there are people actively doing that work in relationship to the University of Chicago and the Hyde Park neighborhood if you want to get involved.
Absolutely. And I'll plug CROWD, which is here in Ithaca, Circularity, Reuse, and Zero Waste Development, and throughout New York State, which was really inspired in witnessing demolitions in the college town of Ithaca and working with Historic Ithaca, Christopherson Center, and Finger Lakes Reuse and the Circular Construction Lab. and many others to re-envision an alliance between preservation and reuse organizations and architects. And going way back, Dennis's work and Assembly House 150 have had a huge impact on my work in the Just Places Lab. And I've seen student projects come out of early interactions that are just amazing. So yeah, thank you both for really fantastic and inspiring presentations. I definitely recommend your book, David. I hope people will check that out in your film as well. Let's hope for a screening at Cornell sometime in the future. So.
Yeah, David, let's get you back to New York. Yeah, thank you both. Thank you, Jenny, for moderating. Thank you, David and Dennis, for presenting and sharing your incredible work. Before we say goodbye and close it out, do you have any last words for preservationists, like capital P preservationists, people who are like in that silo? What would you tell them as people who like have this sort of interdisciplinary approach to your work?
You know, for me, the things that have been most inspiring in preservation work has been the preservation work that has been driven by sort of deep connections of community, realizing multiple objectives simultaneously. And I'm a real advocate for doing work that's that expands our notion not only of what preservation is, but also the sort of amazing opportunities that preservation can afford in terms of affordable housing, community development, supporting people, and preserving our built heritage.
Dennis, anything to add?
Well, I just love old buildings. I mean, old buildings are my favorite. I mean, really, I think, you know, part of why I started the organization is because I really find most contemporary buildings to be so boring and bland. And I think it's important to find ways to do things that invite discovery and curiosity and all the nuance that old buildings have. You know, so every time I walk into an old building, I'm looking at it really closely, and sometimes I'm just blown away. But it could be, you know, walking into a house on Richmond Avenue in Buffalo and just being totally shocked by everything inside. So I think, you know, I don't want to, you know, although I had some words to say about approaches to time and change and growth, I mean, I don't think that means that I'm not passionate about what it is that old buildings do and the importance that they have in the world. And I think it's important to find and make spaces today that seek to recover, reclaim, open up some of those same possibilities that were afforded when those things were made.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for tuning in. The recording of this webinar will be available soon. And I hope that you will join us for another one someday soon. Thank you all so much and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Rose Visually.